are going to talk about if statements and control flow. So this is 3.2 in Code HS, and the new concept we're going to be talking about here are if statements. And so if you've taken AP Computer Science Principles, you've seen if statements before and how it introduces conditions. So let's dive in and talk about what that looks like in Java. So in Java, the syntax is that we have an if statement, and after the keyword if, we put in parentheses a Boolean expression. And as we remember from last class, and when we talked about 3.1, a Boolean expression always evaluates to a true or a false value. So in an if statement, if our Boolean expression evaluates to true, then the code in between the following two curly brackets will execute. So in this case, our age is 19, which means that we're asking, is 19 greater than or equal to 18? This is true, and so the code in between the two braces is going to execute, and we're going to see printed to the terminal, "You can vote." By contrast, if the Boolean expression evaluates to false, then the computer skips over the code that is in between the curly braces. So in this example, we see that age is initialized to 11, which means that this if statement evaluates whether 11 is greater than or equal to 18. We know that 11 is less than 18, so this Boolean expression evaluates to false, which means that the computer is going to skip the code in between these two curly braces here. And so nothing happens unless there's something, that comes after. But this line right here does not do anything. It just completely skips it. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples of how we can use if statements to add some variation to our programs. So what we want to do is we want to kind of refine our program from last week that basically just printed out true or false whether or not the user could vote. This time, let's use if statements so that based on the user's age, we print out "you can vote" or "sorry, you can't vote." So I'm going to switch over to replete right now. And so since the requirement said that we're going to ask the user for their age, we need to create a scanner object. So since I'm using replete, I'm going to go ahead and add my import statement. Usually Code HS does that for us. So I'm going to import the scanner class so that I can actually create a scanner object. So my first step, step 1, is going to be to create my scanner object. Then I want to, step 2, prompt the user for their age. Step 3 will be to store the age to an int value or variable. And then what do I want to do? I want to use an if statement. So step 4, use an if statement to determine if the user can vote. Okay, so we'll break that down when we get to it. Let's go ahead and do these first 3 steps, which should be, getting familiar with these steps involved with creating a scanner object and asking for user input and then storing that input. Been doing that for a while. So I'm always, as always, I call my scanner object input. And then I call the constructor and pass in system.in to that constructor. And then I want to go ahead and I want to prompt the user. So I'm going to use a print statement to basically ask the user to enter your age. Okay, so then the user is going to input a whole number. and I'm going to go ahead and store that whole number. I'll store it as age. And in order to get that from user input, I'm going to say input.nextInt. And so that'll get that whole number that the user inputs. All right, so now I want to use an if statement to determine if the user can vote. So basically, I need to think about what are the rules. In the US, right, you have to be 18 or older. So if the user is 18 or older, print you can vote. If they're not, if the user is not 18 or older, we can rephrase this by saying if the user is younger than 18, print, sorry, you can't vote yet. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's start with this first one here. If the user is 18 or older, print you can vote. So here's our basic structure. We put if, and then we put our open and close parentheses. This is where our expression, our Boolean expression, is going to go. So we want to check to see if the user is 18 or older. So we're going to check that by referring to the age, since that's where the user's input is stored. So I'm going to check to see if age is greater than or equal to 18. If that is true, I want to print out you can vote. So I'll say system.out.print line you can vote. And then down here, we're going to check to see if the user is younger than 18. And if that's true, we're going to say, sorry, you can't vote yet. So if age is less than 18, then we're going to print out system.out.print line, sorry, you can't vote yet. Okay, and that should be it. So let's go ahead and try running this. Okay, so it should prompt us first. I'll go ahead and put my age, 38, and so that's definitely greater than or equal to 18. So it says you can vote. Now let's go ahead and try 17. So it correctly says, sorry, you can't vote yet because 17 is too young, and then we'll go ahead and try 18, which says you can vote. All right. So what we did here is we used this if statement to determine whether or not to perform an action. So whether or not to run this line of code depends on if the age is greater than or equal to 18, and whether or not to run this line of code is dependent on if the age is less than 18. Later on, we'll also learn about the if-else structure, as well as a more complicated version which has if, else if, and else. But for now, we'll just limit ourselves to the simple way here, which is just using the if statements. All right, so we went ahead and we wrote that program that asks the user for their age and then printed out a different message depending on the value of their age. So now let's move on to another example. Let's now create a method that will return a Boolean value. So what we want to do is, given this rectangle class that we see here, that has two properties, two private instance variables, width and height, and this constructor that sets the values for width and height, we want to write a method isSquare that returns true if the rectangle is a square, which means that the width and the height are equal, and we want it to return false if it is not a square, which means that the width and the height are not equal. So let's go ahead and try this out. So I have here in Replete, I've already created the rectangle class. And what I want to do is I now want to implement the isSquare method. So what we want to do is we want to start off with the method signature. And so the method signature is always going to start with the visibility, which is either public, private, or this other keyword you don't need to know for this class called protected. For the purposes of this class, we'll always be writing public methods. So I'm going to start out with public, and then what I want to do is I want to specify the return type. So you can remember that if it doesn't return a value, it's going to be a void method. If it does, then you're going to specify the type. In this case, we can see that we want to return a true or a false. So that means that we want to return a Boolean value. So public Boolean. The next thing is the name. And in this case, they told us to go ahead and call it isSquare. And then the last thing that we want to specify is any parameters, any values we want to pass in. In this case, we don't need to pass any values because this method will have access to the two values that we require, which is the width and the height. So we don't have to worry about passing those in. Okay, so now what we want to do is, and it's giving me a warning here because I'm not returning anything yet and it's expecting a Boolean. But be patient, program. We will get there. So what we want to do is we want to check to see whether or not our rectangle is a square, given any rectangle object, okay? So what makes a rectangle a square? It's if the width and the height are equal. So I'm going to write in just pseudocode here as in a comment, if the width is equal to the height, we want to return true. And then if the width is not equal to the height, then we want to return false. Okay? So now let's go ahead and implement this in Java code. So we see if, so we know we need an if structure. So we start out with if, and then inside of our parentheses, we're going to put some sort of Boolean expression. And our Boolean expression is right here. Width is equal to the height. So remember, when we are checking for equality between two values, we use the double equal sign. So we're going to check for equality of the width and the height, which are just called width and height. Perfect. So we're going to say width double equals height. So this will check to see if the width and the height are the same. So if that is true, we want to return true. And then we can also check to see if the width is not equal to the height. So if, and now we're going to say width, and remember not equal is simply exclamation mark, equal sign, height. So if the width is not equal to the height, we want to return false. All right. So we are, in this case, returning false if that does not evaluate to true. Now, you can see that this is still saying, oh my gosh, you must return a result of type Boolean. And the reason why it's yelling is because it sees if statements. These are conditionals, and we don't know what the value of these conditionals are going to be until we actually run the program. So the compiler is scared. It says, I don't know if this line will be reached, and I don't know if this line will be reached because these are conditionals. And so it's not sure if it's going to be able to return anything. So something that is kind of cool is if you hit a return, like on line 19, it will actually skip everything else in the method. Return not only returns a value, but it breaks out of the method itself. Therefore, instead of writing this other if statement right here, we don't need to write an if statement. We could just put return false. And the reason behind that is because if this expression is true, if the width and the height are equal, we're going to go ahead and return true, and it doesn't matter what comes next because we broke out of the method. But if this is false, if the width is not equal to the height, then we want to go here anyway. So we just put return false, and we can delete all of this stuff. So I'm going to delete these comments, and I'm going to put the comments up here because that's part of our logic. But I am going to delete this other if statement. So these three lines right here. because we don't need it. So now you can see the compiler is no longer complaining because it knows with certainty that it is going to return a Boolean value no matter what. It knows it's going to return true if this Boolean expression is true. But if this is not true, then it's going to go ahead and go to this line 23 and return false. So we should get a Boolean value either way, no matter if it's a square or not a square. So now we have to test this out. So how are we going to test this out? Well, we're going to create a rectangle object. We're going to create two rectangle objects, one that is a square and one that is not. So I'm going to create a rectangle. I'm going to call this one square because I'm going to make it as a square. I'm going to give it dimensions that match the width and the height, that have the same width and height. So in order to do that, I need to call the constructor, so new rectangle. Then I'll make it a 10 by 10 rectangle. Okay, so that's going to be a square. And what I'm going to do to test out whether or not I'm getting the correct value from my method is I'm going to print out the result of is square. So I'm going to say square dot is square. This should return true. Okay, so in order to see this value, I need to put this inside of a print statement. So let's put system.out.print line. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, I'll put a little message before here. This is a square. And then it should say true. Now let's create another rectangle object that is not a square. So rectangle, rectangle, I'll just call it rect. And then we will give it two different values for width and height. So let's say 10 by 20. So this is not a square. So now I'm going to do kind of the same thing on line 5. I'll go ahead and put this is a square because this time I'm going to get a false back. This is going to be a false. So I want to call is square on the object called rect. So we're going to say rect dot is square. And that's going to return true. So this method is going to, this is going to return false. This method is going to return false, which means that this print statement is going to say this is a square and then false. Okay. And then this one up here, this call should return true. So this print statement on line 5 should say this is a square, true. Okay, so let's run that. And we can see that the first object that has the dimensions 10 by 10 is a square. It says true. And then the second rectangle that has the dimensions 10 by 20 says false for this is a square. So that's pretty cool. So let's change this up just a little bit more. What if I didn't want to print out true and false? What if I wanted to print out a different message, just like with the voting application? Let's instead do another if statement type thing. So let's go ahead and say if square double equals true. So, not square, sorry, square dot is square. Because remember the is square method returns a true or a false. So if the evaluation of this statement returned a true, which matches this true, then we're going to print out a message that says this is a square. Okay, and then if it's not, let's say if square dot is square is not equal true. That's one way of saying it. We can also say double equals false. And we can print out this is not a square. Oops. Okay, so we're only doing this for this first rectangle right now. So we should see the message this is a square. We should not see the message this is not a square. Let's run that. And we can see that it says this is a square. And that's because this method right here checks to see if this object has the same width and height. It does indeed. 10 is the same as 10. And so this method is going to return true. And then this statement checks to see if true is the same value as true, which guess what? That is true. True is true. So this whole statement is true, which means that we then print out this message. This is a square. When we get down to this line of code, remember that square dot is square returns true, and we know that true is not equal to false, right? They're the opposite. So this whole statement evaluates as false, and then we skip this line. It does not execute. So that's what's happening there. Okay, and so those are actually the same examples that you will find in Code HS. I just kind of ran through them in Replete instead. So now you can try out the homework exercises. So we have 4 different ones for this section, and I want you to give it your best effort, and then we can go through them together during office hours. So let's do a little bit of a preview of what's to come for that homework assignment. So in discounts, you're going to write a program that computes how much the user owes for parking in a particular parking garage. And so you're going to have to store a few different values. One value is how much the garage charges per hour, which is $3.50. You'll need a double for that. And then there's also a maximum amount that they can charge. You'll want to probably store that as well. So $20 is the maximum they can charge. And so that means if the total comes to something greater than $20, you have to control for that, right? If the total is greater than $20, the user still only has to pay $20. So say like I spent like 10 hours in the garage, that would be a total of $35. I would still only owe $20 because that's the maximum fee that the company can charge. So in this assignment, there are comments in the main method that instruct you on kind of what you need to do. So make sure you take a look at that main method. It walks you through the different steps. Create the scanner object, prompt the user, compute the cost using that rate of $3.50. Check to see if the computed cost is over $20. If it is, then you're going to set the cost to $20. You're going to change the value. And then finally, you're going to go ahead and display the final cost. The next one, sweet or unsweet, you're going to write a program that asks the user what they want to drink. Then ask how many teaspoons of sugar they want. Then you're going to print out the order again to confirm it. When you print out the confirmation, you're going to print out the drink name, and in addition to that, if the user wanted more than 0 sugar, then you're going to print this along with the drink name, the string with sugar. If they said anything other than 0, or sorry, anything, if they say 0, then you're not going to add the with sugar part. So look at this example here. The user wants to drink green tea. They put in 0 for the amount of sugar. So when you confirm their order, you just print out green tea. But if the user said something greater than 0, like 4, then you would print out their order, in this case coffee, with the string with sugar. And you've got two more. You've got cooking. In cooking, you write a program that helps a novice microwave chef decide how long to microwave a refrigerated bread roll. You're going to use the math class for this one. You have to remember how to generate your random integers, so look back at your notes to how to do that, between 0 and 60. And that's going to represent the number of seconds the roll will be microwaved. You're going to go ahead and print out the number of seconds that you generated as that random number. And if that number is less than or equal to 20 seconds, you're going to print perfect cooking time. But if it's greater than 20, you're going to print out your roll will catch fire, because that's probably too long to microwave bread. If you've forgotten how to generate random numbers, they do have an example right here that will remind you, or you can look back at your notes. And here are some examples of some example runs. The last homework problem is rating. And a rating gives you access to a rater class that represents a rating system for a company. A company is rated on the scale of 1 to 5, and it looks like it can also include decimal points. So that's represented with a double data type. The two-string representation changes based on how well the rated company is. So there's some if statements there that if it's over a certain number, it's going to say gold star. If it's below a certain number, it's going to say not recommended, and so on. And then they kind of like walk you through what those numbers are here, and you're going to have to implement that. And then remember, this is key. Once a return statement is executed, that means the rest of the method is skipped. You exit out of that method. You're gone, right? So if you hit a return statement, nothing else gets reached. And then another method you have to fill in is called set rating. The rating should only be changed if the new rating is 5 or less, right? Because it's on a scale of 1 through 5. A rating of 6 or 7 or anything higher than that is not valid. After you fill in rating, you need to go back to the rater tester class and go to the main method to produce some output. So you will have to note that the main runs several test cases to check to see if all the conditions of the program are valid, and then you need to make sure that you test every line of code. So this is your test class, and so it's going to go ahead and test out if you filled out everything correctly in the rater class. Okay, so again, you're going to get started on this, and in next class, we might do 1 or 2 of the problems before going to the new content. And then on Friday, if there are additional questions, we can finish it up then. All right, good luck. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Jupyter or email me or message me on Google Classroom.